So one thing we see break down in this process is we hand it off as a salesperson to the buyer. We throw them over like case studies. Maybe we let them talk to a customer as like a referral, right? And then where we like kind of lose it is they go and create the business case. But what we rarely hear them say is, and then I took that business case back to the salesperson and said, what do you think of this? Is this like typical of what you see? Is this make any sense? Is this how other companies are doing this? And the salesperson gets totally like cut out.
Welcome to the Win-Loss Show, where we discuss why B2B companies like yours win and lose deals. Here at Closed, we've conducted tens of thousands of buyer interviews for hundreds of different companies, and we've uncovered what drives your prospects and customers to buy, not buy, or even churn. In each episode, we'll explore things you can do to help you identify and double down on your strengths, improve your weaknesses, and ultimately create more revenue.
So I brought Scott on today in this episode. Scott's one of our senior consultants at Closed. So Scott, you're one of the people out there actually interviewing buyers in our clients' win-loss programs.
Yeah. Thousands of interviews is the line that gets thrown out a lot.
Thousands of interviews.
It is true.
Exactly. So in the episode we're talking about today, a specific, what we call decision driver or reason of influence on a deal, right? And one we're talking about specifically today is the sales process and follow-up. So we see that as a theme in our win-loss data.
And we see it a lot.
Yeah. Can you kind of help us understand, like peel that back a little bit, help us understand what sales process and follow-up means, why you guys tag things as that?
So sales itself is a big theme that includes a lot of things. The way I think of it is it's the things that are happening behind the scenes, things that are happening in the kitchen, bringing the buyer to the point where they can actually close the deal. A lot of those things that happen are kind of invisible to the buyer unless they're pretty sophisticated, unless they've worked in a restaurant. They don't necessarily know what's happening in the kitchen. They don't know what sales consists of. Process or follow-up, I think of the things that, bring the kitchen to them. It's the waiter. It's kind of the things that they can see where like, I know some things are happening behind the scenes, like the business is doing things. It's the interactions that they're having with the buyer, with the customer. So we talk about process and follow-up. It's really things like the responsiveness that they're getting from the company they're interacting with. So we can see things even early in the sales cycle. We can flag issues of, customers are reaching out to you. They're putting in requests on your website, but it's taking longer for you to get back to them than it is your competitor. So sometimes you find out that the process and follow-up, the problem can start that early, that you're having a disadvantage because you're not getting to the buyer fast enough. That the person that comes to them first, they can set the tone, they can set the script.
Sure.
If they're down the funnel a bit further, sometimes process and follow-up can consist of just the way that they're communicating. Is that cadence of communication too frequent or is it too infrequent?
Mm-hmm.
A lot of buyers have enough awareness that they can say, sales is sales. They expect certain behaviors. They expect them to want to close the deal, so they expect them to follow up. But is it that they're doing it in a way that's causing annoyance?
Right.
Or are they
Too
saying,
aggressive.
are they saying, hey, they were persistent and I respect it?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Like persistence with respect is kind of a cool mantra.
Mhm.
So in this sales process, something I've seen and we've talked about a little bit in this episode is that the salesperson needs to enable the buyer with a very well thought through process to help that buyer become a champion. Because the salesperson only gets to like sell to that one person a lot of times, and then the buyer's got to go figure out how to sell it internally. So are there some things that a salesperson you've seen do in their process that enables that buyer, that helps them become that champion? Or some things you've seen them not do that actually end up in a loss?
Yeah. I think sometimes it's just a matter of that sales rep understanding where the buyer is coming from and actually understanding what does the ideal follow-up look like for you. And that kind of gets into another sales theme that's like empathy and understanding. But even keeping it to that process, like when you do obtain that level of empathy and understanding, like, can you understand, like, this is how my buyer wants to be communicated with?
Sure.
That they want like a text follow-up, or they would consider that to be kind of a violation to where they get to that annoyance phase. Is part of that process understanding there's other stakeholders that I need to reach out beyond to enable that. Or it could be, the buyer's asked me this question, the buyer's asked for this. It's actually kind of surprising how many times that follow through doesn't happen, where they end a demo and the demo could have gone really well. But in order to really sell this upward, somebody that was in that demo, they're looking for something that demonstrates ROI. And so they ask for a case study, they ask for a reference,
Mhm.
and the sales rep isn't able to deliver that, or they're not able to deliver that on time. Recently, I was talking to somebody who represents procurement, and part of their procurement process is they specifically ask for a letter of reference. The reference was supplied, and it was actually a good reference that met the criteria, but it didn't come in the letter format that they were looking for.
Oh, funny.
And what she told me though, is she says, actually, I have a very specific reason why I want it to be in that letter format.
Okay.
And so by failure to deliver the reference in the format that she wanted, that actually was the primary deal breaker.
No way.
And they had no idea. They probably had no idea that they were the only vendor that didn't supply it in that manner.
So she uses the format of the letter as like a test. Like if
Mhm.
they can't stick to this instruction, they're probably gonna drop the ball on implementation or
Yeah.
something.
And it's her coming from a place of, if we have this in a letter, like she wants written down verbally, like just in open-ended format. They ask for the letter because typically that's not something that companies just like have on hand,
Yeah.
where they might have a case
Case
study on hand,
studies, right.
or they might have, oh, I know that I can send any of my referrals over to like this person because they're
Yeah.
going to be glowing. But by them saying, I want a letter that answers this question, she knows they're going to have to go to a new like
Yeah.
reference and get that feedback.
That's
And she leaves it.
that's clever.
She does. And she leaves it open ended with intent that I just want to see the language that they use. So when
Yeah.
they talk about, like, what do they talk about?
Man.
So she knows she's getting like a from scratch
Yeah.
thing that levels the playing field for anyone.
She's a clever buyer.
Yeah.
Well, that's awesome. So this is a perfect setup in this problem of sales process and follow up and how that does affect deal outcomes. So I interviewed Nate Nasralla from
Mhm.
Fluent.io. He's the CEO there. And they're building a tool to help salespeople do this better. So we can take it to that. All right, Nate. Thanks so much for joining me. I'm excited about this conversation. I've been watching your LinkedIn content. I love kind of the things you've been lining up about how to create a clean, thoroughly vetted sales process to enable your buyers, make them a champion. Because we all know buying is actually not an easy thing. Many of us out there trying to buy things are very inexperienced at it. We do it occasionally, or we've never done it, or et cetera, right? And there's a lot of times when you pair up a junior salesperson that doesn't have a ton of experience with an inexperienced buyer, it's not always like a perfect combination, right? So I'm excited about what you and your startup are doing and the content we've talked about. So, Nate, why don't we start there with what you guys are doing at Fluent, and how you're approaching that problem for context sake, but also this podcast, I want it to be tangible. I want people to walk away and be like, man, maybe that'll solve this problem of how do you create a good buyer process? How do you create a good sales process? So let's start there, man. Tell me about Fluent and let's go.
Yeah, right on. So the problem that I'm building Fluent to tackle is the fact that so often sales reps lose deals when they're not in the room. And the reason is that all of the conversations that can make or break a deal aren't happening in a sales meeting, like in a Zoom conversation with the buyer. It's after that call wraps up. And that buyer is then go talking to the rest of their team or the quote buying committee. And the message, how they handle questions, objections, determines whether or not they're going to be able to, one, get others involved in the deal, and two, whether or not they're going to continue to push the deal forward internally. And so much of sales tech, sales process, it all centers around what the rep is doing in the sales meeting. And so one Fluent as a product or a platform is built around that internal buying conversation. And then two, a lot of to your point, the content, the practices, things that I'm excited to get into today is all about how do putting software aside for a second, what are just some of the methods, the practices that you can use to enable your buyers to sell with you to keep the deal moving forward. So that's kind of the quick setup or a point of view that I like to bring to the conversation.
So you went and watched Hamilton and you heard Aaron Burr say, I want to be in the room where it happens. And you're like, and that's a great startup idea. Is that where it came from?
Honestly, yes. So
No way.
I know it's kind of a funny story.
Yeah.
So before we started actually developing or coding Fluent as a platform. I love product design. So I was doing a lot of prototyping work in Figma to design and try to figure out, okay, what could this look like? After I had done some like very simple proof of concept work using Google Docs as like a very early version to prove it out from the buyer's perspective. So then when I flipped around, came over to the sales reps perspective, I kind of got together a team of different sales reps at places like Adobe, Demandbase, ChargeBee to help me design this product. And one of them, his name's Chad. We were kind of going back and forth on how to like talk about this problem. And Chad was like, "Oh, it's like Hamilton." He's like, "I want to be in the room where it happens." And he kind of like
Yeah.
sang that line.
Yeah.
And I was like, yes, like
Yeah.
that is exactly the issue. You want to be in the room where it happens, but you're just so often not. So, absent the ability to be there 100% of the time,
Yeah.
what do you do?
You're in a cool place. It's not every day that a SaaS startup has Lin-Manuel Miranda create their messaging for them. So that's really lucky for you, man.
That's right. Now it's
Yeah.
the first words that you read on the website.
I love it. That's really, really great. So talk to me a little bit more about what are you guys seeing as far as when you say we're not in the room with as a salesperson, right? The salesperson does this demo
Mhm.
and they're confident. The buyer tells them, maybe, yeah, I feel really good about this. I've got budget for it. I've got buy-in, etc. That ends, they leave. Like, what are some of the things that you see or you've heard happen in that room where the seller isn't at?
Mhm.
And then let's talk a little bit deeper about like what can a seller do to influence that conversation? Because that's where it kind of falls apart, is what you're saying, right?
Yeah, that's right. So I think one of the more kind of interesting lenses to look at this is from the perspective of the buyer. And so all of the research that I was doing started with buyers first to say, when you get excited about a product that you think can help you solve this problem, what do you do? Like, where do you take that?
Mm-hmm.
And what buyers time and time again would talk about is this idea of the treasure hunt, where they would talk with a sales team. They'd get a stack of links sent over to them afterward, a ton of different, think product decks, marketing materials, case studies, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And the exercise for them is to go through, hunt down the 2 or 3 points that are relevant to the conversation, because they're part of all team meetings, meetings with their executives where they're outlining their priorities that they're already sold on.
Mm-hmm.
And so what the buyer is trying to do is, how do I thread the needle between information that I have from the seller in their own format, their words? How do I then build out some materials to help me message to my leadership why they should care about this?
Right.
And so 80% of the conversation that they're having is around problems, the right approach to solve the problem. And then they're stitching in what they found in this, treasure hunt, where they kind of picked out these different excerpts from the seller's material. And then they're slotting this in to help them articulate or message the product's value,
Mm-hmm.
light of all of the other context that they just set up kind of within this business case. And so the majority of the time, they were writing their own business case. They were doing the work of what you would traditionally say, hey, this is the sales rep's job to write out
Yeah.
and create this,
Right.
not only the business case and messaging, but
Yeah.
the material to support that. And buyers do that with the caveat that they're committed. Like they want to see it through, number one, and two, that they're experienced, like they know how to do this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And on the flip side, when it was more of kind of an inexperienced, more junior buyer, they more often they wing it. And they just kind of walk in to the best of their ability,
Yeah.
try to articulate issues, which ends up kind of staying at more the functional level as opposed to more of a strategic kind of executive narrative. And so they would really struggle. So I could keep
Yeah. No,
going
it's great.
deeper and deeper into that. But if there's anything kind of interesting, I'm happy to press in on one area of that more.
Yeah. And something we see in our win-loss data is when we go and interview buyers and we see the same kind of thing. Like the sales process didn't enable the buyer to internally build a case for ROI or perceived value. So the buyer will come back to the salesperson and say, "I was budget. I couldn't get budget." Right. But when we interview them deeper and we have more contextualized conversations, and we're third parties, so they're generally more candid with us, right? What they actually kind of come back to us and say is, if they had been able to prove like a value or an ROI, I could have had budget made, but I couldn't do that. Like, and they didn't do it for
Mhm.
me, right? And so one thing we see break down in this process is kind of what you're saying. Is exactly right. Like we hand it off as a salesperson to the buyer. We throw them over like case studies. Maybe we let them talk to a customer as like a referral, right? Or we do a
Mhm.
bunch of other things to try to prove a little bit more of that value, which are all fine things. And then where we like kind of lose it is we allow them to not allow, but they go and create the business case, and whether that's like a spreadsheet and they're doing calculations or whatever it is, and they're basing a bunch of assumptions in there. But what we rarely see in our data is a buyer telling us, so I went and created the business case. Like I put together an entire model for how this product or how this solution solves my problem and returns X ROI. What we rarely hear them say is, and then I took that business case back to the salesperson and said, what do you think of this? Is this like typical of what you see? Is this make any sense? Is this how other companies are doing this? And the salesperson gets totally like cut out, right? So one thing that I felt like I would love to push on if I was in sales is, hey, I'm going to send you a bunch of case studies. I'm going to send you all that after this call. What's your next steps? Like, you got to get a buying committee. You got to get budget. Like, what does that look like? And they're probably like, yeah, I got to go make a business case. Like, awesome. How how would you feel about doing that together? I want to like help you with what we're seeing as far as benchmarks, as far as assumptions that you're putting into this business case, and I'll give you a worst and best case scenario that we see across the board, right? And at least like try to get yourself into that meeting, so or into that process. Is that something that you guys are trying to do with your tool, or is your tool more like, um, here's a bunch of case studies and we'll give you the right one at the right time? Like, help me understand a little bit of that too.
Yeah. So most times, three different buyers will build three totally different business cases. Number one, because they're three different organizations. But
Yeah.
number two, they're not necessarily studying the art of building an effective business case. Like this
Yeah.
is what sellers listen to podcasts like this to figure out how to do and perfect, right?
Right.
So I'll kind of talk about it both from the platform perspective, but more as a general process is like, yes, kind of the kind of key piece of what our platform is doing is converting a buyer's words in a conversation,
Hmm.
language that they use to talk about their problems,
Cool.
to the content you can then drag and drop into a business case framework.
Yeah.
So the buyers are framing up and providing content just by attending a sales meeting, talking about issues. And then, two, as the seller, you're bringing a framework to suggest and guide them to say, hey, here's an effective way to structure this narrative. This is what we see a lot of executives tend to resonate with,
Hmm.
answers a lot of these key questions. But you're also doing it in a way that is branded, built for them around their language. And so that's kind of, the two parts of it is like you as the seller study this,
Hmm.
you can guide this. It's a chance to add value, but buyers need to be part of building it with you. And
Yeah.
that's how it lands far more effectively. The practice that's behind this that is always super helpful is as a seller, just ask, hey, is there any type of standard, maybe format or way that you present material during a team meeting? Like, would you mind sharing that with me or just sharing over a blank copy of it? And the more that you can understand and then incorporate helpful elements of what their team is already familiar with and used to saying, it's going to help your message land that much more effectively.
Mm.
And two, sometimes when I've done this, I get a wildly confusing structure that is like very complex and detailed that I don't know how anybody wades through it. And I'm like, look, here's a 2-page framework that I would love to take a first swing at building for you. And then
Hmm.
you can give me some feedback and we can do it together. Like, what do you
Yeah.
think? Most times they're like, oh, thank heavens. Yes, that would be great.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't feel like I've seen much coaching for sales reps specifically about this. Like I see so much about how to do outreach, how to cold call, how to do emails, how to get in touch with the right people, um, how to demo really, really well, how to like do a 30-second note. Like there's so much leaning on all of that stuff. I
Yeah.
haven't seen a lot of coaching or training on here's how to help a buyer build the business case. And maybe that's just because I'm not in sales and I'm missing some of that. But are there like really good resources that you've seen or stuff that anybody listening is like, yeah, that's kind of a weakness that I have. I'm not good at helping a buyer become a champion and build a business case, but I don't even know how to really do that. Like, where would you point that person?
Yeah, it's a small crew that has been building over time. Historically, a lot of the tech sales industry generally has focused on the sales rep and the sales meeting.
Hmm.
And now with more and more data coming out about how much time you actually have with buyers versus what's going on inside the buying org, people are starting to begin to shift. And that's part of why we're talking about this idea of buyer enablement,
Hmm.
helping people realize that yes, for all of the time and attention and thought leadership in the top of the funnel, prospecting, so on, like all of that becomes worth it when you are converting that into new business by enabling the buyer down
Hmm.
to the bottom of the funnel. So that to say, invalidate the fact that, yeah, content practices on this is light out there, places to check out. One, Brandon Fluharty, he and I jam on this idea quite often as writing being a top skill for especially an enterprise rep to develop and
Yeah,
to go deep into the art of.
sure.
How do you craft memos, narrative driven documents in order to influence the outcome of a sale and empower a champion? Another great person to follow is Jen Allen at Challenger. She and I talk quite a bit about this idea of framing up problems, helping buyers understand and create consensus around the problem
Hmm.
before kind of going in to the sale, when a lot of what's out there is it's all product heavy and product centric
Hmm.
sales reps. So those would be the two top people that I'd start with
Yeah.
if you're kind of looking for some more resources.
Yeah, they're both great. I've seen content for both of them. That's excellent. That's awesome. One thing I wanted to kind of dive into is like so you've talked, and I've seen this myself. You've talked about this buyer enablement trend, right?
Mhm.
And my biggest complaint with it is it's all a push of I don't even know the right way to say it. It's kind of like a thought I'm having as we're talking, but it's
Mhm.
like I just see these hard lines of buyer enablement means a person never talks to a sales rep until they absolutely want to. It means like we have to showcase pricing all the time, everywhere, and in every instance a buyer would find us. It's like, and no,
Uh,
not I'm not saying those things are wrong, but I don't see it enough where it's like I run a team, right? I have
mhm.
designers on my team, I have junior marketers on my team, and right now I want my junior marketer to be out there evaluating like, is there a better tool to be doing customer marketing or marketing automation or something like that? This person's never bought a software tool in
Yeah.
his entire career. Like he's just starting in his career, right? And in my opinion, like I actually want a really, really good sales rep that's coming at it from a consultative approach to actually do buyer enablement more so than I want him to go to a website and see that they have their pricing on a landing page. Like that's not as important to me as do they have a sales rep that's going to help him make a business case and create a really, really, really persuasive pitch for why we should be looking at this product and what's the ROI and is it going to be easy to implement and all of that. Like really own the sales process, right? Own it in a way that turns them into what we've been talking about. Like really do buyer empowerment or enablement so that this junior marketer can turn around to me and say, look, like with this sales rep's help and this sales rep's help and this one's help from these three different vendors, I've done a ton of due diligence and I feel like I've done a good job of it, even though I've never done this before. And then it becomes less of like I'm immediately just feeling like he has no idea how to buy and I just write off any idea he comes to me with, but he's actually got a business case in hand and he can kind of like make a logic argument for it, right?
Mhm.
Maybe you've got some thoughts on that where that's my complaint about buyer enablement.
Yeah. Yeah. I'll give you some thoughts on this and then a story. So the thoughts is that in many ways, what you're talking about is pre-sales versus when you're interacting with a sales rep. And so a lot of times buyer enablement, people are kind of thinking more top of funnel. Like, can we expose more information about product early on? And that's fine. Like the pre-sales piece
yeah.
of it is one element. But where you really get stuck and where most deals fall apart is when you get deeper into the heart of the buying process, where one person is like, okay, I read everything that I can, and that's fine. I'm sold, but how do I get these other 12 people on
Mm.
board and ready to go ahead? And that's where sales is still very much at the center of that process. And that's why I think the true kind of definition of the term buyer enablement is shifting to think of a sales rep like an account executive in many ways as an enablement team of one, doing for a buying committee the same types of things that an internal sales enablement team is doing for that account
Mhm.
executive. Like, what are they doing? They're helping with messaging, developing content, materials to drive the deal forward, thinking about process and structure, all things that teams have been doing for account executives is now what account executives do to help buyers move forward after reading all the things that they
Yeah.
can, in more of a pre-sales
Yeah.
context. So that's those are my thoughts. I'll contextualize this with a story. When I was working on kind of early conversations designing the platform, I was talking with a first sales enablement hire inside of a company that does 3D modeling software. And he was hired on to figure out, like, how do we help our team sell more? And one of the first things that he was trying to do was get a sales development platform outreach installed for their team to help generate more pipeline. And he had been a former outreach user at his last company. And so one day he goes into his one on one with the CRO and he's like, hey, by the way, I did a demo of outreach just to kind of refresh on some of the newest features, have been a long time user. And I'm going to move forward with buying this for the team. Like, we really need it for pipeline development. And the CRO was like, no, we don't need it. And he was like, what do you mean? It's like, yeah, we don't need that software.
Yeah.
And he was kind of dumbfounded because in many ways you think of a sales development or a sales engagement platform as like table
Now,
stakes, right?
yeah.
Like, how do you run an SDR organization
Right.
without it? And so his point to me was like, oh my gosh, now that I'm like trying to buy something, I realize how much of my enablement has only been a small part of the picture. Like, I haven't been thinking about the buying job internally. I've been thinking about my rep's job. And so what did he have to do? Back to our earlier conversation on the business case, is like, okay, I had to go and create this. The rep at Outreach wasn't building this for me. I had to talk to my CRO about, look, because we don't have this in place, here's the huge issue with pipeline generation, what we're missing out on every single quarter, why this, from an industry perspective, from an approach, this makes sense. And part of his issue is like, because he had no sales engagement platform, all of their outbound outreach was totally like just manual and not measured. So he's like, I'm caught in this dilemma of, I have no data to talk about response rates and things like that because we don't have a platform measuring it. That's exactly why I see this
Yeah.
platform. And so he was spinning his wheels internally for a couple months on a thing that you would otherwise say is like, yeah, just, every sales org needs a sales engagement platform. And he was like, no, I had to sell my CRO on this idea. I did that job 100% alone.
Yeah.
internally.
That's fascinating to me. It does give me a little bit of PTSD. My first tech job was an SDR when outreach and
Uh-huh.
sales loft and all of those didn't exist yet. And it was all manual recording in Salesforce, every single task. And I'm like, this is much more work than just actually talking to people. Like, so yeah.
Right.
So I can't even imagine doing that job now without tools like that. So talk to me a little bit about, and I want to also say, in my comment earlier about buyer enablement, I totally agree with, let's educate a buyer in the pre-sales process as much as possible so that they close faster, they're more interested, they're more convinced before they talk to a salesperson. But I have a problem with, like, we lean so heavy into that, and that just people that are inexperienced at buying and buying is difficult are just going to be able to evaluate and do it entirely on their own. And I'm like, I don't want to over index so far because we're all sick of cold calls that we forget like how
Mhm.
helpful it is to have a very cool consultative sales rep that owns a process cleanly and helps you checklist and guides you through, okay, this is what you need to do next. And here's how I'm going to enable you to do that. So I just don't like the thought of over indexing so much that we kill a good AE that's good at their job because everybody's just like,
Mhm.
going bipolar on this topic, right? Um,
Yeah,
yeah.
I'm with
So
you.
let me ask you this. So in this, so in that context, the pre-sales, the sales, the AE handling this, how would you like? What are some things that you would tell an AE today? Here's three things you could do to
Yeah.
improve your sales process so that it actually turns a buyer into a champion and turns them into like
Mhm.
enables them. And then we'll from there, if you can, let's take it over to like, okay, how can marketing help with that? Because I have marketing listeners too that are like, stop ignoring me. Let's talk a little bit about us too.
Yeah.
So yeah, let's start with AE. What would you tell them?
So we've been talking about this idea of the business case for a little while, and I think it for some people, if as part of your sales motion you haven't been writing and building these with your buyers, it may sound a little
Hmm.
amorphous. So let me break
Great.
this down. The most simple form of a business case is one page that outlines a narrative that your champion can take to an executive that one specifically frames the problem in a way that relates to one of their priorities, quantifies the cost of leaving it unsolved, and articulates why it's getting worse. And that right there may take you a few different discovery calls to correctly frame, fully unpack,
Hmm.
and measure. And if you skip past that, you are not going to get into any type of productive product conversation down the road. You may have a champion that's excited about the product, but they're going to hit all types of friction. So that's the first piece of the business case. The second is the approach. And the approach is essentially answering the question, what needs to be true for us to solve this problem? Now, if you're talking, let's say, to a marketing team and it's like, we need more leads, it's like, great. There are countless ways to generate more leads. What's the right one given what is happening, the current situation inside your
Hmm.
organization? And an approach is totally agnostic of a vendor or a product. Then you can get into this is the excerpt of your product, right? What's different about what you do that others don't that fits that approach to solve the problem, right? So it's one small snippet in there that proves and says, like, hey, we are somebody who can deliver and come through in a way that you feel very confident about. There's going to be low regret. And this last piece, very important, which is the payoff. When you do this, what happens? What is the impact to some type of metric that that executive cares about, has prioritized, and that others on the team that are part of that buying committee are incentivized to solve? So that's your business case. It's a one page narrative document that clearly outlines that message and packages it in a way that when you're not there, the champion can articulate that very clearly and do so in a way that is so compelling everybody else wants to have a
Hmm.
conversation and get involved with the deal. That's what a business case is. In other words, it's not case
Right.
studies, it's not other product
Right.
decks, right? That's one sliver of it. And you can layer those things on over time, but this is the foundation. So that I gave you like
It's
multiple
great.
points and I'm kind of
No, I
choking up
love
the
it.
question of
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
three
No, it's good.
things, but I'm going to call that point one.
Good.
Um, so, so point two would be this has to be built in your buyer's own language. And the reason is that the way teams talk to each other is going to be different account to account. And to the extent that you can piggyback off of the language or what's called, quote, a trigger phrase internally, you're going to get more buy in and speed in the deal. So, an example of this, which I think it's like I use this as the example because it's such a catchy phrase. The former CEO of SendGrid, his name is Jim Franklin. We're having a conversation about this
Hmm.
this concept, and his trigger phrase was "make the mail move." Any priority, anything that was funded inside of the company, whether you were a developer building features, marketing, acquiring more users, whatever, your objective was to make the mail move. More users sending more emails more
Right.
successfully. And if you brought him a budget request that didn't relate to that, it was declined. It was just like an automatic mental filter to say, okay, this isn't part of the
Yeah.
company's priority. Right. So if through discovery you can understand those and then use that language throughout that business case, you're going to signal very immediately to the person who needs to sign off on it. Oh, got it. This is part of what I already care about. this is worth my time to evaluate and have some
Yeah, let
conversations.
me, I know that's probably your point too. Let me pause you there because
Yeah.
that one's really interesting because I get asked all the time, hey, you're
Mhm.
heading up marketing and close, you're a marketing leader, et cetera. Tell me what challenges you're facing. I'm like, well, the same challenges every marketing leader is facing. Like, I need more leads and I need to prove that I'm spending less to get them, right? Like, you should know that.
Mhm.
But what they don't think about is when I go and present, I want this tool, I want this budget. They don't think about like what's the person that I'm trying to get this buy-in from, what's their challenge, right?
Mhm.
And so I could sit there all day long and be like, my challenge is more leads, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. When actually the true challenge is we need to improve win rate. Like maybe we have enough pipeline and I'm gonna say like I need more leads because I'm the marketer and that's what I'm bonused on or that's what I'm whatever it is, right? So you're asking me personally what I need, which is okay, but also like extend it beyond that is kind of what you're saying is like use the company's culture, the company's values,
Mhm.
and not the values that they throw on as marketing speak, like the actual values of the CEO. Like, I need this thing done, right? The thing that their board is pressuring them on. Like you're saying, send more mail. Um, and then
Yep.
when they go into that meeting, they're like, hey, this helps me with this problem that I'm feeling right now in my purview. But guess what? It also looks like this helps with win rate, or it helps with this other problem that we're all feeling in all departments, or it helps this problem. And it like makes that cross functional power of budget buy-in a little stronger. I think that's really cool. I haven't actually heard somebody express it that way. So I think that's super good, Nate. I like that a lot.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Your champion's biggest priority may not be the company's
Hold,
biggest priority, and you need to help them
yep.
build a bridge between
And
them.
I'll pause you there too. A lot of times
Yeah.
in our interviews with buyers, we'll actually pull out that the real decision making trigger was a personal reason. This doesn't
Mhm.
happen a lot, but every now and then there's
Yep.
like this person wanted this thing for some political reason. Like I've seen some instances where they selfishly just wanted to learn about that tool because they felt like that tool was trendy and it was upcoming. I've seen this a little bit more in like the engineering world where they're like, oh
Yep.
man, this thing that AWS is doing or that DevOps engineers are learning about or whatever is becoming the next thing. It's like this new programming language or this new whatever it is, right? Functionality that AWS has launched. So they're sitting there like lobbying for it. It's going to help us solve this problem, but in the background, they're actually like, and they'll say this to us. Well, part of me also wanted this tool because I felt like it would help me learn it and set me up for my next job. You're like, well, wait a second. Like your
Yep.
personal reasons probably didn't align with your company at all. And maybe that's why you didn't get budget. You know what I mean? So yeah, that's amazing. That's
Mhm.
great.
Yeah, and what you just called out are two elements of a good champion. One, there is personal
Yeah.
incentive, but second, there's also influence across the company. You have to shape and influence the direction of the company while keeping tethered to, in some very personally
Hmm.
meaningful way,
Yeah.
some incentive
Yeah,
in the deal
totally.
for you.
Awesome.
So yeah, that was it. That was
No,
my
no,
third
let's
one.
go to the
Oh,
third.
the
Yeah.
third one.
I digressed you enough. Let's go to third.
No, no, it's good. Well, the third actually relates to the
Awesome.
point that you brought up, which is okay, if you're selling me a marketing tool, I may have to go get others
Hmm.
to support it. And when you think about how reps typically follow up on a meeting, they're writing to that person that they were just meeting with, as opposed to writing an email that will travel through them up to the next person that they need to get
Hmm.
involved in the deal. And so the shift that you need to make once you have your business case developed, you've kind of discovered some of the trigger phrases, the language that you want to use, package this all up in an affordable email. An affordable email might go something like this. Let's say your number one goal is lead generation, but your CMO's number one goal is reducing CAC, cost to
Hmm.
acquire customers, before the next fundraise because she has to go to the board and say, look, we're growing in an even
Right.
more efficient way. And up front, those two things may be in
Yep. Yeah.
conflict, right? Let's say you are selling some type of platform to manage more ad spend or, what have you. Can you clearly articulate in your email why this is a path to optimizing and reducing CAC, which relates to her goal? And if so, then I'm going to help you because you're like, oh, great. Now I can forward this on to her to say, hey, you want to have a conversation? I've been thinking about how we
Yeah.
reduce CAC.
Yeah.
You look great. And you're also getting your job done of like keeping the
Yeah,
lead flow humming over for the
exactly.
sales team.
That's great. I think that's a really good uh, 3 and some extras checklist of like of how to own this sales process in a way that creates a buyer champion. And really, in my mind, does what buyer enablement should do instead of just like the small things of, hey, let's throw pricing on the website or something like that.
Mhm.
Amazing. Well, I know I asked you, how can marketing help? I think inside of that, there's a ton of things like this business case, product marketing, et cetera, should fit right in that, like help the AEs at least be equipped enough with some sort of framework so they know how to do that, help them
Mhm.
understand the buyer's world a little bit better. Like these are things the buyer probably cares about, but their boss, which I haven't actually ever seen in a company, our buyer persona cares about this. I've never seen anywhere in there where it's like the buyer persona's boss cares about this and there's misalignment or there is alignment, which is critical, right? Like they're going to this person for budget and you're not even including them in your buyer persona research. Any other final thoughts, Nate?
I would say very, very last thought. All of this hinges on your ability to consistently and very thoughtfully do deep discovery
Hmm.
with your buyer. Help them begin to think about questions that like they never considered and they want answers for internally as well. Because if you're not doing consistent discovery, you're not going to know very much to put into things like a business case
Right.
or affordable email. It's gonna come across very shallow and product oriented because you really haven't done the hard work of discovering what the problems are, the way people talk about these internally. So that's the foundation or the fundamental skill is your ability to sell with the buyer by helping them rethink what's going on, discovering new things that they may not even
Hmm.
know or recognize are
Those are
happening.
some of my favorite moments in sales or in marketing is when you surprise someone with new insight and they're like, you can see it in their face. Like, oh, I haven't actually ever thought about it that way. And everything starts to change from that
Mhm.
moment. Maybe we can do a whole other follow up episode on discovery and how you use that to build this kind of sales process that we're talking about. But we're a little bit out of time here, running up against the clock. So, Nate, thank you so much. Really cool to have this deep conversation with you. I'm going to be watching Fluent. I think it's a cool idea. I'm excited to see how that goes. And yeah, thanks again. We'll talk to you soon.
Well, well, thanks for having me. I
Yeah, of course.
appreciate all the support.